Hello and welcome to Rob's Retro Reviews, where today we're finally at the end of our Spyro trilogy retrospective. So, if you've not watched the other videos in this series, I recommend you do that before watching this one because I'll be referring back to those throughout this video. So, today we're taking a look at the final game in the trilogy, Spyro Year of the Dragon. And I think this is where this is going to get a bit controversial because this is a lot of people's favourite in the entire series, and let's just say, I don't share that opinion. Before I begin here, I just want to say that this is actually the first time I've ever finished this game. I've played Spyro 1 and 2 so many times and fully completed them too, but before making this review I was never able to get fully invested in Spyro 3. After having finally played it to full 100% completion, I think I know now why it hasn't ever grown on me. This makes me a little bit biased because I don't share any nostalgia for this game like I do with Spyro 1 and 2, and to be honest, that may have clouded my judgment of it. However, I've tried to throw all of that to the side for these reviews and just look at the games for what they are. Something that's probably worth pointing out is that the version of the game that I played was the Platinum PAL version, and the reason this is worth pointing out is because there are actually several differences between the American NTSC version, the original European PAL version, and the greatest hits and Platinum versions of the game. Basically, Spyro 3 was rushed to completion to make sure it released in the year 2000, the year of the dragon in the Chinese zodiac, and so that it was out by Christmas of that year. Because of this rush though, the original version of the game had several glitches that result in the original release being an incomplete version of the game. I won't go into every single difference, but basically there was loads of music that wasn't finished in time for the NTSC release, meaning there's loads of tracks that are straight up reused. There's glitches which prevent you from ever getting all of the collectibles if you leave areas before getting all of them. There's entire cutscenes which don't play, and to be honest, the whole thing is just a mess. Some of these issues were fixed in the initial PAL release, but most of the problems were finally properly gotten rid of in the greatest hits and Platinum versions of the game. Weirdly though, there are still differences between the Platinum and greatest hits versions, which means that there isn't actually one conclusive definitive edition of the game. Also, for some stupid reason, the version of the game that's available to download on PS3 is the original American version, which is the worst edition of the game. So, as I said, the version I played for this review is the European PAL Platinum version, because that's the one that I own, and luckily it's one of the best versions of the game too. Now all that business is taken care of, let's talk about the story. The first thing I noticed is that there's a very weird lack of sound design going on in this game's cutscenes. Like in this first section, there's no dialogue and hardly any background sound effects, and it just comes across as being a bit awkward. Like normally a character would appear and say what they're doing or something, but here, it's just silence. There's even moments where it feels like Hunter or Spyro are about to shout, "Hey, come back here," or "After her," or something. But there's just nothing, and the music doesn't change to match what's happening on screen either. It's just ambience. Take a look for yourself and tell me something about this doesn't feel off. And this is the first impression the game gives off. It feels unfinished and rushed to say the least. Then the next part of the cutscene starts and there is dialogue, but again it just feels off.
Now, go guard the tunnels. Stop anyone from coming through.
It's like it's a parody of itself or something. They went way too far with the evil villain archetype and made them have the most stereotypical voice imaginable. I don't know, there's just no character here. When Ripto is introduced in Spyro 2, he comes across as childish, throwing tantrums but still being a threat due to how unpredictable he is. And his sidekicks add slapstick comedy into it, which gives the villains way more personality. But here, I'm just getting nothing from it. Just like with the first game's story, there's a few inconsistencies here that aren't explained. Like, why are Zoe the Fairy and Hunter here from the second game, but Elora and the Professor are nowhere to be seen? Like, surely after everything that went through in the second game, Spyro would get them all to help, right? Again, it's just a bit weird and it's not really acknowledged either. To be fair, Alora and the Professor are actually in the game, but way later on, and they're more of cameo roles as opposed to being important to the overall plot. So anyway, there's an evil sorceress who's called the Sorceress, and she and her apprentice Bianca have stolen the dragon eggs from the Dragon Kingdom and took them to the other side of the world, to a place called the Forgotten Lands. Later on you learn the reason for this is because the dragons used to live in the Forgotten Lands but moved away 1,000 years ago, and since leaving the magic in the land has slowly faded. So the reason for wanting the eggs is so that the lands don't just cease to function properly because they rely on magic so much. That makes sense, and it's actually quite interesting because the bad guy has a motive rather than being evil for the sake of it. But then you discover that the sorceress just wants the dragons for the wings, which can be used for a spell to make her live forever. So at that point they had an interesting plot set up, and then just did nothing with it, and just decided, nah, we're gonna make the villain more stereotypical instead. The message should have been that she could have just asked the Dragon Kingdom for help rather than using force to get what she wants, and that almost happens, but then it just throws a curveball at the last minute and ruins that completely. It feels like they wanted to do more with the story but couldn't quite pull it all together, and that's disappointing. There is a bit of a side story going on which I like, where upon learning about the sorceress's real plan, Bianca leaves her and teams up with Spyro, and then her and Hunter end up getting together and becoming a couple. But it would have just been nice for the main story to have been good too. Plus, you can see the Bianca plot twist coming from a mile away, but this is a kid's game so I guess it's fine. The gameplay is fundamentally the same as Spyro 2's. You explore open levels and basically just collect anything shiny while completing side objectives to earn dragon eggs, which replace the orbs and talismans from Spyro 2. An aspect I like is that Spyro actually retains all of the powers he learned in the second game and can use them from the start of the third game. It's not often game sequels do this. I guess Rayman 2 does it to an extent with you being able to use your helicopter here, but then some other powers have to be relearned, so it's not exactly the same thing. Normally it's like with Kingdom Hearts, where between the second and the first games, Sora forgets all of his abilities and has to learn them all over again in the sequel. So yeah, it's interesting how Spyro 3 doesn't do that. Despite the base game being pretty much the same as Spyro 2, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, that Spyro 3 adds on to this. So firstly, the levels no longer consist of one large open area for you to explore, and instead you go from the hub world into a level, then the level splits off into 2 or sometimes 3 smaller sub-levels. These often feature some sort of different playstyle, like a skateboarding minigame, which is surprisingly good, or a side mission. The thing I really don't like about this though is that it gets rid of that feeling of the level being its own world that's just fully open to you, because to access these smaller areas you have to go through a loading screen, and it just breaks it up too much. Sometimes it really feels like these areas didn't need to be in a separate sub-level too. Like for this side objective where you need to guide these sun seeds into a pot, the sub-level is so small that surely this could have been a part of the main level. But to be fair, sometimes the side areas are huge, so you can kinda see why they had to be separated at times. Another annoying thing about this is that if you're going for 100%, it can be difficult to tell where the hell the last gem you need is. The gem total for the levels includes the sub-levels, so it could be missing in the main level, or it could be missing in any of the sub-areas, and you'll have no idea where it is. It makes it too daunting to fully explore everywhere, and that's really bad because this used to be one of the most fun aspects of the game. They've taken something that was fun and rewarding and made it a chore. Something that makes finding those hidden gems a bit easier though is that instead of Spyro gaining new abilities as the game goes on, it's now Sparx who gains these abilities throughout the adventure. He gets a longer distance on his gem grabbing, he becomes able to take an extra hit, the ability to fast travel to previously accessed levels, break open treasure chests automatically, and most helpfully of all, the power to point Spyro in the direction of the nearest gem. This makes it so much easier to tell if the gem you're missing is in the main level or one of the side areas, and it saves the game from becoming outright ruined. If it wasn't for this ability, I honestly think I wouldn't have enjoyed the game anywhere near as much as I did, because most of my time would have just been spent running around almost empty levels looking for that one last collectible. What's weird about this though is that Sparx actually had this gem finding ability at the beginning of Spyro 2. The reason I never mentioned it in my Spyro 2 video was because I literally didn't use it a single time. I think this is because with the levels being one open area, it makes it easy to quickly find the gems you're looking for, so you never really need the extra help. I just find it a bit weird how Spyro has kept all of his powers from the second game, and yet Sparx has to relearn one of his newly added abilities. A change they made to Spyro 3 that's actually a little bit ahead of its time is that apparently it automatically changes the difficulty of the game depending on how good, or bad, you're doing at it. I can't really comment on this though because I didn't really notice anything changing as I was playing it, but it's pretty cool that they even attempted something like this. The biggest change going from Spyro 2 to 3 though is that there's now a ton of other playable characters. There's Sheila the kangaroo, Sergeant Bird the penguin, Bentley the yeti, and Agent 9 the monkey, who are all brand new characters. But then you also get to play as Hunter for the side missions in the flight bonus levels, which return from Spyro 1 and 2, and you can actually play as Sparx too in these top-down shooter levels. That's a total of 7 playable characters, which is insane when you consider that in the previous game you literally just played as Spyro. In Sergeant Bird's cutscene, he explicitly states that he has limited ammo.
These are the latest military hardware. DBX-9 rocket launchers, state-of-the-art.
So why didn't you use them to escape?
Because I have limited ammo, and I wanted to conserve it.
And yet, when we're playing as him, he never once runs out of rockets no matter how much you shoot. So the conclusion I've come to is that he's just a liar. I bet he's not even a sergeant. While it might sound good that you get this many different playstyles, I have to say a lot of them are pretty bad or alternatively just very mediocre. Sheila's levels control pretty clunkily and just aren't designed that interestingly because her moveset basically just consists of her being able to jump really high, which isn't really that interesting of a gimmick. Bentley's levels are just painfully slow, and you play as him for the single worst part of the whole game, this boxing match. I don't even know if there's really a tactic for this, it just feels like you kind of have to button mash and hope for the best. The hitboxes are just all over the place, and the speed you attack at always seems to vary too. It's just rubbish. Sparx's levels are okay, but quite boring because they're all a little bit too long and are all pretty much the same. And then there's Sergeant Bird, Agent 9 and Hunter's levels, which are actually alright. If it had just been these 3 characters who were playable, I think I would have been okay with it. But because all the other ones are added on top of it, it just feels like it was a bad idea. I think you can really tell with Spyro 3 that Insomniac were getting a bit bored with making Spyro and wanted to move on. Just with the amount of new vehicles and characters they threw at the wall here, it just feels like they were almost testing to see what they wanted to do for the next game, as opposed to focusing on making an actual Spyro game. This is most apparent when you take a look at Agent 9's levels, where it literally just feels like a test area for a Ratchet & Clank prototype. Like seriously, you have a laser gun, you throw bombs in exactly the same way Ratchet uses the bomb glove, there's first person aiming, and the whole feel of it just reeks of Ratchet & Clank. You can even strafe left and right, which is very weird because you actually can't do that in the original Ratchet & Clank, and that game would have been a lot better if this function would have been implemented. So why is it here in Spyro 3 if it isn't in Insomniac's next game? Weird. There's even sections of the main game that feel like Ratchet & Clank, like the skateboarding racing missions where it's literally just the hoverboard racing from Ratchet & Clank. Hell, even the level design in Spyro 3 starts to resemble Ratchet & Clank, with the way the ends of the levels always loop back to the start by activating some kind of shortcut. Only in Ratchet & Clank, this is way better because all the levels have 2 paths, so it makes sense that it would loop back to the start. Remember when I said that comparing Spyro 1 and 2 makes the first game seem almost like a beta for the second game? Well here, Spyro 3 almost feels like a beta for Ratchet & Clank. Also, why can Sparx suddenly talk now? He's never done this before, and it's not acknowledged that he's suddenly capable of this either. In fact, what's even more shocking is that he can now shoot lasers out of his face. Why didn't he tell anybody that he could do this earlier in the series? It's like in Crash 3 when Aku Aku starts shooting lasers and talking. What is it with all of the third games and the lasers and the talking? My overall biggest problem with Spyro 3 is that it just feels rushed. There's just so many different problems I encountered with it as I was playing. Like the fact there's no jingle or animation for completing levels now, the sound design being really bad in some areas, like when you rescue a dragon egg and it hatches and clearly does something that would make a noise, but there's silence. The voice acting in the cutscenes sounding compressed and low quality, and this part where there's an explosion that just isn't audio balanced.
Oops!
There's also no level flags this time either, so it lacks that same amount of attention to detail that the other games had. There's no intro and outro cutscenes for the levels now, which is annoying because that added so much personality to the worlds in Spyro 2. There's absolutely loads of reused assets from Spyro 2 sprinkled through the game. Music is consistently reused through several different levels, and there's loads of gameplay mechanics that are straight up copied from Spyro 1. Which makes Spyro 3 feel like the most unoriginal game in the trilogy, despite it also being the game that by far has the most content. I mean, there's these barrel-throwing enemies, the supercharged circuits, treasure chests where you need a key, magicians who move the environment to halt your progress and generally get in your way, a focus on egg thieves, and you even travel to the second world using a hot air balloon. All of these things have already been done in the first game, and while a couple of these things could have been seen as a reference or just a cool, hey, this was in Spyro 1 moment, when there's this much, I don't think you can get away with saying that. Also, you can no longer press L1 and R1 to rotate the camera around Spyro, and instead, pressing either of these buttons will make the camera instantly snap behind him instead. Like I said in my Spyro 1 review, using L2 and R2 to rotate the camera just feels awkward on a PS3 controller, so it's unfortunate that you can't use L1 and R1 like in the second game. Speaking of the game lacking attention to detail, a couple of characters that return from the second game are Handel and Greta. But in Spyro 2, Handel spoke normally while Greta used W's instead of R's and L's.
Hello, Spyro. My brother Handel and I have been sent here to blow up this castle. Hey, Spyro, we need those flags to prove our secret mission was successful.
But in Spyro 3, both Handel and Greta talk like this.
Oh, hello! It's good to see you again, Spyro. That naughty sorceress has stolen the professor's rocket plans, and I'm on a secret mission to find them.
Uh-oh. You'll have to use this combo power-up to take out these fire dragons. It will allow you to super fly and super flame at the same time.
So they either knowingly changed Handel's voice, or it was a mistake and they just misremembered them both talking like that and didn't bother to check. Either way though, it's just one of those things where it doesn't really matter, but it just goes to show that Insomniac weren't as passionate about the third game, or they wouldn't have made mistakes like this. Remember how the bosses in Spyro 2 were built up and the fights were challenging and fun? Well yeah, they aren't any of that in Spyro 3. In Spyro 3, the first time you see most of the bosses is in a cutscene directly before the fight, where they just basically appear after the sorceress uses a magic on a normal enemy. So really, these fights all feel very anticlimactic because you don't even know what you're fighting, or even why you're fighting them. It's not like they come out and attack you or you get trapped in an arena with them. You just land in the arena by choice and they're stood there waiting for you. The fights themselves are quite bad as well, most of them just consist of picking up a special ability and using it on them until they're dead. And the only one that's any different is the first boss, where you're supposed to charge into them, which knocks them into the lava surrounding the arena. The thing is with this though, is that for the past 2 games we've been told to not charge big enemies, so it seems a bit counterintuitive to expect us to just know to do that for this fight when you're against a big enemy. I don't know, even the last boss is pathetic because it's basically just a repeat of the last 2 bosses. She doesn't have multiple phases or anything, so it's just really disappointing after going straight from Spyro 2 to 3. Throughout this whole game I was waiting to find a dragon baby called either Rob or Robert, and after fully completing it, I found there wasn't one. The closest I got was a dragon baby called Roberto and an NPC called Bob, so I guess I'll have to settle for that. The music is also a bit of a weird situation for me. While Stuart Copeland returned to do the soundtrack for the third game, there was also a new face helping out with it in the form of Ryan Beveridge. And I can only assume that this is why this game's soundtrack is very different to the others. While it does sometimes still sound like a Spyro game, it also sometimes sounds extremely different and way more upbeat, and I'm just not sure that the mix of these 2 styles works. It almost sounds like a fan-made soundtrack, a very good fan-made soundtrack though, but still, something about it just doesn't feel authentic. I mean, listen to this and tell me it sounds like a Spyro soundtrack. It's not that it's bad, it's just that it's not fitting with the sound that Spyro's had for the last 2 games, and for me personally, I found it a little bit jarring. While I've basically been talking about what I don't like about the game for all this time, at the end of the day, it's still a Spyro game and there's a lot to like here. Obviously the controls for Spyro are spot on and the graphics are still incredible. You can now press select to instantly open up the stats for the level you're on. The skill points list now tells you which level you're missing them on, which obviously makes getting them without the use of a guide much more realistic. It appears on the screen when you've got a skill point this time, although there's still not that much of a fanfare. You get to personally take back all of your gems from money bags at the end of the game, which is satisfying. I love how certain characters from Spyro 2 make cameos. Elora, the Professor, Handel and Greta, and Uga all make appearances. And despite not having as much background detail as the previous 2 games, there's still a few levels that have some really nice charm to them. Like this level where everyone speaks in haiku for no reason, or this one where you're stopping an evil magician from marrying the world's princess only to find she wants to be with him and they both ride off into the sunset on a magical motorbike. Or this one where a Lara Croft parody called Tara makes a surprise entrance. There's a lot to love here, and when the game is good, it's damn good. Just like in Spyro 2, if you get all of the skill points, you're rewarded with an epilogue section, which consists of a slideshow showing what happened after the end of the game. But again, just like with the secret endings of Spyro 1 and 2, I think this is non-canon, and it's just more of a fun extra. Nasty Nork and Ripto are both featured in it though, which is cool. Anyway, let's finally talk about Spyro 3's completion reward. After Spyro 2's amazing one, I'm sure they've upped the game even more this time. They haven't. The completion reward in Spyro 3 is basically the same as Spyro 1's, where you unlock an extra level with loads of gems in it and you can fly around pretty much infinitely by using this power-up gate. What separates Spyro 3's secret level from Spyro 1's though is that there's also some side areas where you enter some vehicle sections. One of them actually contains one of the hardest parts of the entire game, where you have to win this skateboarding race, but falling off of the track a single time basically means you've lost. This actually took me a good few attempts before I managed to do it. The secret level also contains the secret last boss, where you fight the sorceress again, but it's really bad. You just get in a UFO and blast her, and that's it. There's no other tactic to it, and there's no other phases. You literally just hit her, and she dies. You don't even get the infinite super flame power up again, which is really the least I would have expected. You know what, I am quite surprised that they didn't ever put an infinite flight power into the game as a 100% bonus. I always wanted that as a kid and it just never happened. Like I said in my first video, it obviously isn't realistic because you could probably break the game by using it and access areas you weren't supposed to. But they could have added in flight restrictions or something in certain areas, so you couldn't go as high to prevent this. I don't know, I just think it would have been cool. It certainly would have been better than the practically non-existent reward you get in Spyro 3. The overall problem with Spyro 3 is basically that it came out after Spyro 2, and because of that you can't really help but compare them, and for me, when you do that, you realise just how much better Spyro 2 actually was. Weirdly though, that isn't the main opinion out there. The general opinion is actually that Spyro 3 is the best of the whole trilogy, and it's most fans' favourite in the entire series. I just don't agree with that at all though. For me it's Spyro 2 all the way. I'm giving Spyro Year of the Dragon a 6 out of 10. And before you get the torches and pitchforks out, let me explain. Spyro 3 is trying to do way too much, and while variety is good, variety to this extent leads to most of the ideas presented to you being underutilised and not expanded enough to warrant being here. I would rather have had a game that still had variety, but where each idea was solid and used throughout the game so it could be made use of multiple times and be fully developed. In Spyro 3 though, there's Agent 9 who just by himself has a third-person shooter level, a first-person shooter level, and a top-down shooter level, and that's just one character. It's just too much. Another side effect of having this many things going on is that for me, Spyro 3 is way too long, and actually outstays its welcome a bit. Just for reference, Spyro 1 took me approximately 4.5 hours to 100%, Spyro 2 took me around 8 hours to 100%, and Spyro 3 took an insane 13 hours to get 100% on. And yeah, I hadn't fully finished Spyro 3 before, so it would make sense that that would take longer, but it's not like I got badly stuck at any point, so I think it's fairly reasonable to compare them. Spyro 1 and 2 are the perfect length for their two game styles, but Spyro 3 is a damn long game and could have perhaps done with a bit of trimming down, particularly in some of the added playstyles that aren't really needed. When you look at what Spyro 1 did, it was being relatively simple and didn't take risks, but exceeded in everything it was trying to do. But now we have Spyro 3, which takes loads of risks and just doesn't hit the mark most of the time. So the question is, what's better? A game that has the guts to take risks but with retrospect probably shouldn't have? Or a game which doesn't take risks but is a more consistently good game for it? For me, when you're comparing Spyro 1 and 3, Spyro 1 is the overall better game when you look at it for what it is. What I will say though is that when Spyro 3 is good, it is better than Spyro 1, but when it's bad, it's a lot worse. So in my opinion at least, Spyro 1 is a 7 out of 10, Spyro 2 is a 9 out of 10, and Spyro 3 is a 6 out of 10. All of them are good, but Spyro 2 is close to being a masterpiece, while Spyro 3 just feels like quantity over quality a lot of the time. I've got one last little gripe with Spyro 3. Why is the finishing percentage 117%? That's such an odd number to finish on. Spyro 1's finishing percentage was 120%, but at least that's a round number. 117 is just so weird. It's just another small attention to detail problem that I've got with this game. Something that I really liked was how at the end of the credits of Spyro 3 there's a message from the developers which says, "We hope you've enjoyed the Spyro trilogy, we've had 4 great fun sleepless years creating it." It's such a simple sort of thank you message, but it's actually kind of sad, isn't it? It almost feels like it wasn't only Insomniac saying thanks to the fans, but it's also a goodbye message from them to Spyro. Like they're saying that this is the end and it will only ever really be the Spyro trilogy to them. I just didn't expect to see something like that, and I love it because it shows how much they obviously really did care about the series they created. It's a nice but kinda melancholy note to end these games on. Well, that's it. That wraps up my thoughts on the entire Spyro PS1 trilogy. If you enjoyed watching them, consider giving them a share, and also comment down below letting me know what your favourite game in the Spyro series is, and why. I'd be interested to know everybody's thoughts. As for me, I'll be waiting for the Reignited trilogy to come out, and then I'll be playing through the games all over again to do a review for that. So, if you subscribe, you can look forward to that coming in the near future. But, until next time, bye! Thanks for watching. Hopefully I don't enrage a load of people with my uncommon opinion on Spyro 3. As I said before, it would be a huge motivation booster for me if you subscribed, liked and commented on this video, and plus it would be nice to know other Spyro fans' opinions too. With me being such a small channel, literally any interaction helps, so yeah, please let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.